In 2011, 24-year-old line cook Marco Ruiz vanished while closing his shift, his wallet left behind, and his last text reading, "He came back, alone." The restaurant's owner, Luis Belmonte, claimed he knew nothing, even as he quietly sealed a wall inside the freezer. But 7 years later, during a routine renovation, workers cracked open that wall and exposed a horrifying truth no one had dared to imagine. This is the case they tried to forget, until the freezer gave Marco back. On October 12, 2011, in the industrial outskirts of San Bernardino, California, the sun was already dipping behind the dry hills when 24-year-old Marco Ruiz clocked out of his shift at 6:42 p.m. The temperature hovered around 91 degrees. Surveillance from the back exit of El Jardín Verde, a modest but busy Mexican fusion restaurant, showed Marco exiting alone, still in his grease-stained apron, keys in hand. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder and was visibly agitated, pacing before finally vanishing behind the dumpster enclosure that separated the lot from a narrow service alley. He was never seen alive again. The first 911 call came in 19 hours later, at 1:23 p.m. the following day. It wasn't from a family member. It was from the restaurant's new prep cook, who arrived to find the kitchen still locked and Marco's name unsigned on the overnight cleaning sheet. "He never skips," the voice said shakily. "Marco's like a machine." Police arrived on site at 1:57 p.m. Marco's car was still parked 2 blocks away, untouched. Inside, his phone and wallet sat on the front seat, doors locked. His last text was time-stamped 6:51 p.m., a single-line message to a coworker. He came back, alone. Investigators reviewed the restaurant's security logs. The building's electronic access panel showed Marco badged out at 6:43 p.m. The only other entry that night? At 9:18 p.m., the owner, Luis Belmonte, using his personal code. No one else entered or exited. Luis later told detectives he came back to grab a personal item, but he couldn't specify what. When asked why he didn't report Marco missing the next morning, Luis shrugged. He quits every other week. Employees told a different story. There'd been a tense, closed-door argument that night over back pay, a full month's wages Marco claimed were being withheld. One waitress said she heard shouting, then silence. Another said Luis never raised his voice, just repeated, "You think you're irreplaceable?" over and over. Despite extensive searches of the surrounding lots, rooftops, and alleyways, there were no footprints, no blood, no signs of forced entry. Cadaver dogs were brought in. They barked once near the walk-in freezer, then sat. No one acted on it. At 3:12 p.m., Marco was officially entered into the California Missing Persons database. By 6 p.m., flyers began circulating in both Spanish and English, and the hashtag #ShashFindMarco started trending locally. The final line on the flyer read, "Wearing black non-slip shoes, green chef pants, no jacket, last seen closing El Jardín Verde." But what no one noticed then, not detectives, not co-workers, not even Marco's brother who showed up in person, was that the freezer door's latch had been recently changed. Newer bolts, fresh sealant, and just inside that door, a false panel no one had thought to pry. October 13th dawned dry and still, the kind of morning that made time feel sluggish in San Bernardino's industrial belt. By 7 a.m., the Ruiz family had called every local hospital. No one matching Marco's description had been admitted. The restaurant remained open. Business continued. His co-workers were expected to carry on as if nothing had happened. At 8:25 a.m., the San Bernardino Police Department launched a formal grid search within a 1.4 square mile perimeter surrounding El Jardín Verde. The air was already thick with heat, 80 meters and climbing. Officers were divided into 10-person teams. They combed alleyways with rakes, checked dumpsters, and rapped on the locked doors of empty warehouses. One officer climbed the fire escape behind the pawn shop 2 doors down, finding only a shredded hat and 2 unopened bottles of Modelo. Detectives mapped the area using a quadrant overlay, sectioning off terrain into labeled zones, Lot A1, Drainage B2, Rooftop D3. They focused first on locations that fit 2 criteria, low visibility and noise isolation. A dry irrigation canal behind the kitchen matched both. It was bone-dry and filled with crushed soda cans, old tires, and weeds. They found nothing. At 9:04 a.m., K9 teams arrived. 2 dogs, trained in human remains detection, were released behind the restaurant's delivery entrance. One German Shepherd immediately reacted at the base of the walk-in freezer's latch, barking, then sitting, ears forward. The second dog confirmed it, triggering the same response near the freezer's lower vent. But without a body, a warrant, or visible signs of foul play, the freezer wasn't opened. It had been legally modified, or so the owner claimed. The police took notes and moved on. Inside, the kitchen hummed as usual. The manager, Luis Belmonte, insisted Marco stormed out after accusing him of stealing wages. When asked for time cards or payroll documentation, Luis claimed they were stored off-site. By 10:15 a.m., detectives reviewed Marco's phone records. His last outgoing message was time-stamped 6:51 p.m., sent to co-worker Daniela Ayon. He came back, alone. The phrase would become infamous, quoted on flyers, news graphics, even online forums. At 10:43 a.m., Daniela shared the message during a formal statement, visibly shaken. Full 911 transcript, mandatory insert. Dispatch. 911, what's your emergency? Caller. Yeah, hi. I work at El Jardín Verde, and, our line cook didn't show up. He was supposed to close. Dispatch. What's his name? Caller. Marco. Marco Ruiz. Dispatch. How long has he been missing? Caller. Since last night. He left, but his car's still here, and he texted me something weird. Dispatch. What did the message say? Caller. He came back, alone. I think he meant the boss. Dispatch. Stay where you are. Officers are en route. The signal from Marco's phone had last pinged at 34.178 again, 117.2936 W, directly behind the restaurant. His GPS log cut off at 6:52 p.m., within 90 seconds of his last text. No other data, no calls, no location updates followed. His car, parked 2 blocks away on Valley View Street, had been ticketed overnight for violating alternate side parking. Inside, his wallet, phone, a receipt from the kitchen supply store dated the same day. The keys were missing. At noon, detectives questioned Luis Belmonte. The 42-year-old restaurateur was polite, but vague. He claimed he returned to the restaurant at 9:15 p.m. for a phone charger. When asked to produce it, he couldn't. When asked where he'd left it, he gestured broadly toward the kitchen. Somewhere back there, maybe. Detective Sophia Park took note of a detail she couldn't unsee. The freezer door's bolts. Brighter. Newer. The grout below looked fresh. When asked about repairs, Luis said he'd reinforced the hinge 2 weeks ago. City records showed no permit for electrical or structural changes. By 2:30 p.m., the search effort had doubled. Over 30 volunteers joined. Former co-workers, college friends, even 2 retired veterans from a nearby VFW hall. They fanned out with printed flyers, scotch tape, and hand-drawn maps. Most were bilingual, and both English and Spanish versions of the flyer began appearing on storefronts and telephone poles. At the top, a photo of Marco in his green chef pants, holding a spatula and laughing. At the bottom, in bold letters, "Last seen closing El Jardín Verde. If you saw or heard anything, call." That evening, the local NBC affiliate aired a 90-second story. It included a clip of Marco's 19-year-old sister, Liliana Ruiz, standing beside a photo collage outside the restaurant. "Marco's not someone who just disappears," she told the camera. "He doesn't party. He doesn't leave town. This place was his second home. He would never just walk away." But back at the station, someone was watching the footage again. Slowly this time. At 9:42 p.m. the night Marco vanished, the external freezer light flipped on. Not motion activated. No timer. It stayed on for the rest of the night. And there was one more thing. The bulb had been changed. Just 3 days before. Why would someone change a freezer light and leave it burning all night? Call to action, number 1. If someone you loved vanished without a trace, would you tear down every wall? Comment "hope" if you'd search until there was nothing left. October 14th, 2011, Day 3. The sun beat down harder than ever, 97 degrees by mid-morning with no wind. Heat shimmered off the pavement outside El Jardín Verde as a small crowd of volunteers gathered for another day of searching. But this time, it wasn't just family and friends. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office had authorized expanded support, mounted patrol, FLIR-equipped helicopters, and a temporary mobile command unit parked beside the restaurant's delivery entrance. The official search grid extended now to 5 square miles, encompassing a nearby dry wash, a cluster of auto junkyards, and a chain of shipping containers that lined the Southern Pacific rail yard. Detectives were beginning to think Marco hadn't disappeared by accident. He had been hidden. At 10:14 a.m., aerial thermal imaging began. A Bell 407GX helicopter, tail number N637SB, circled above, sweeping for unusual heat signatures. The forward-looking infrared, FLIR camera, returned expected patterns. Sun-heated asphalt, rooftops radiating warmth, a few stray dogs panting in alleyways. But one patch stood out. The freezer behind El Jardín Verde, still several degrees cooler than its surroundings. A deputy called it a black box in a field of fire. No one moved to open it. On the ground, the Ruiz family established a formal volunteer HQ at a borrowed tent behind a nearby gas station. There were tables of water bottles, printouts of search routes, and a growing map covered in red X's, areas cleared, places still to check. Liliana Ruiz manned the intake table. She kept her brother's photo in a plastic frame beside the logbook. At 11:32 a.m., a group of volunteers uncovered a shallow depression behind a chain-link fence, 0.8 miles from the restaurant. It was partially filled with scorched trash and broken glass, but beneath the debris, they found something unusual, a chef's knife wrapped in a soiled rag. The blade was engraved with the logo of the restaurant's supplier, Chef Pro USA 210mm. Detectives tagged and bagged the knife. The serial number traced back to an order placed by El Jardín Verde's kitchen manager 7 months earlier. Luis Belmonte signed the invoice. Microcliff, but no blood, no fingerprints, nothing to prove it belonged to Marco, nothing to hold. Meanwhile, the restaurant's staff grew quieter. Daniela Ayon, the co-worker who received Marco's last text, had since stopped answering calls. Another line cook was seen packing up his knives into a gym bag and leaving mid-shift. Detectives interviewed a dishwasher, 19-year-old Roberto Mendez, who claimed he saw Luis re-enter the freezer on the night Marco vanished. He was in there a long time, Roberto said. Like, maybe 20 minutes. Just standing. No food delivery. No boxes. Why didn't he report it? Because I need my job, he said. And because he saw me looking. At 2:47 p.m., the sheriff's office issued a public appeal for any external security footage from nearby businesses. Within an hour, the manager of a liquor store across the street turned over 8 hours of night footage from October 12th. It showed a key detail. At 9:21 p.m., a large object, possibly a commercial-grade trash bin, was wheeled across the alley behind El Jardín Verde. The figure pushing it was blurred, but the frame-by-frame review showed work shoes and green chef pants. Only Marco wore those. But there was a catch. The pants in the footage were clean. Too clean. Back at HQ, Liliana Ruiz received a tip through the family's hotline. A man claiming to be a former handyman at the restaurant said he'd been asked 6 months earlier to build out a second panel inside the freezer, to create a hidden cooling chamber for overflow. He was never paid for the work. And his contact? Luis Belmonte. At 5:18 p.m., Detective Park revisited the restaurant, alone, without a warrant, and stood again in front of the freezer. The hum was faint, and the padlock had been replaced. Newer brand. The sealant still tacky near the hinges. She stepped back, took a photo, and wrote only one line in her field journal. This is not a freezer. This is a vault. But without legal cause or a judge's order, she couldn't touch it. Not yet. Microcliff. The walls were cold, but no one had proof there was anything on the other side. Later that evening, a candlelight vigil was held in front of the restaurant. Over 100 people came. Many brought handwritten notes. Others wore shirts printed with the same last message Marco sent. He came back. Alone. One girl whispered it like a prayer, and the freezer light, still visible through the rear security camera, stayed on, motionless, glowing like a warning from behind sealed steel. By the morning of October 15th, the case of Marco Ruiz was no longer local. A brief spot on KTLA Channel 5 snowballed into a full segment on Good Day LA, and before noon, true crime YouTube channels began stitching together footage, timelines, and maps. Reddit threads dissected every second of surveillance footage. Speculation ignited. The headline in the San Bernardino Sun read, "Chef vanishes, freezer-eyed. No search warrant yet." The comment section exploded. At 9:12 a.m., the Ruiz family's tip line recorded its 100th call, a woman from Bakersfield claiming she saw Marco on a Greyhound bus. "He had a green apron," she said. Detectives traced the lead. No such passenger was logged. False. Another caller claimed to be a psychic. "He's under concrete. That's all I'm allowed to say." Detective Sophia Park logged the call without comment. At 10:07 a.m., an elderly resident 2 blocks away, Dolores Avila, 72, phoned in a more detailed claim. She said she'd seen Marco around 9:30 p.m. on the night he vanished. "He ran past my alley window," she said. "Fast. He looked scared." Dolores lived at 2929 Temple Street, just east of the restaurant's rear lot. When detectives canvassed the alley behind her building, they found nothing conclusive. No cameras, no blood, just oil stains and a torn flyer flapping against chain link. Still, Dolores insisted. "Then I heard a man shouting, and a big metal slam, like a freezer or a container door." It matched the timeline, but when asked for the direction Marco was running, she paused. "North. No, maybe west. I don't remember. It was dark." At 1:43 p.m., a group of amateur sleuths arrived at the restaurant, uninvited, armed with phone cameras and theories. One wore a shirt that read, "Open the freezer." They filmed a walkthrough around the dumpster alley, uploaded it to YouTube. It received 220,000 views in 24 hours. Detective Park, watching the growing spectacle from her unmarked car, noted the risk. The more noise, the less signal, and one false lead could kill the next real one. Inside the restaurant, employees were growing paranoid. One hostess quit mid-shift. A cook claimed someone had keyed his car in the lot. Luis Belmonte refused all interviews, issuing a brief written statement. "We are cooperating fully with police and hope for Marco's safe return." It was the last time he spoke publicly. Later that evening, a 4th call came in, this one from an anonymous number. The voice was male, clipped. "He's not missing. He's locked up cold. You're standing on him." The line went dead before it could be traced. And behind the restaurant, the light inside the walk-in freezer remained on. Always on. By late November 2011, Marco Ruiz's name had faded from nightly newscasts. The flyers were still up, sun-bleached, curled at the edges, but the urgency was gone. No search crews, no press vans. The heat had broken, the leads had dried up, and without new evidence, the case stalled. The San Bernardino PD officially reclassified the investigation as inactive pending new information on December 3, 2011. Marco's file, case Narsh SBP 11-1749, was placed into cold case storage, a faded manila folder inside Box 9C of the department's missing persons archive. The Ruiz family, however, did not stop. They hosted a candlelight vigil every 3 months on the same sidewalk outside El Jardín Verde. Liliana Ruiz updated a blog titled, "Where is Marco?" and over time it became a small digital shrine. The last post from the first year was dated October 12, 2012, 1 year to the day. It read only, "No answers, no body, no peace." The restaurant surprisingly stayed open, but barely. Online reviews plummeted. A photo of the freezer door began circulating on Yelp, captioned, "Don't order anything cold." Within 2 years, El Jardín Verde had shuttered. By 2014, the building stood empty. Vandals broke in. Graffiti covered the kitchen walls. Someone spray-painted the word "coffin" above the freezer door. Despite their limited resources, the Ruiz family pursued private investigators. 2 of them dropped the case. One stayed, Rafael Moreno, a former Riverside PD detective, now working freelance. In 2013, Moreno submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for the restaurant's building permits and freezer specs. What he discovered was chilling. The freezer had been retrofitted in May 2011, 5 months before Marco disappeared. According to city records, the permit listed interior insulation work and non-load-bearing partition wall, commercial grade. The installer? A small subcontractor called Chiltech Solutions, no longer in business. The partition wall had never been inspected. Moreno tried to contact the man who signed the work order, a junior employee named Victor Najera. He had since moved to Arizona and refused to speak on record. But according to a second-hand report from his cousin, Victor once told him, "There was a second space. They told me never to mention it." But it wasn't enough. No body, no witness, no probable cause. The building sat untouched. By 2016, the case had become something else entirely: urban legend. Marco Ruiz became a cautionary tale in California kitchen circles, muttered behind prep tables and dish pits. New hires were warned to keep backup pay stubs, never argue on payday, never be alone after close. In interviews, Marco's mother remained composed. She kept his room unchanged. A whiteboard near his closet still held a note he'd written the week before he vanished. "Call Chiltech. Pick up chef's coat. Ask Luis about check." 3 years in, nothing changed. Nothing. 4 years in, the freezer was still sealed. 5 years in, the landlord put the building up for sale. And then in March of 2017, the Ruiz family received a notice. A local developer had purchased the lot. Plans for demolition. Moreno made one final push. He filed a legal motion to request that the freezer not be scrapped, citing it as a structure of forensic interest. The court declined. The developer planned to renovate, not demolish. No permit required. But that meant something else. Contractors would soon be inside, and whatever was behind that false panel, if anything, would finally see daylight. Call to action number 2. If your loved one's case went cold for 5 years, would you keep pushing? Comment, "Never forgotten if you'd never let it go." By early 2018, Marco Ruiz had been missing for over 6 years. The story had cooled to the point of silence. New detectives, younger and unfamiliar with the case, took casual glances at the file, but it remained boxed. Case number SBP 11-1749 was classified cold, no movement, red-stamped and shelved among dozens like it, names without faces, photos without bodies, questions without answers. But the building that once held El Jardín Verde had not been idle. The new owners, Hollister West Developers, had filed permits to transform the former restaurant into a gastropub called Furnace and Field. On paper, the remodel was routine: new counters, plumbing, flooring. But one line on the permit caught Rafael Moreno's eye. Freezer compartment to be gutted, false wall removed, rewired for beer storage. That line lit a fuse. Moreno, now working as an unpaid investigator for the Ruiz family, reached out to the lead detective on the original case. He was gone, retired in 2016. The current desk held Detective Ellen Fox, newly assigned to cold case review. She was sharp, methodical, and more importantly, open-minded. She reopened the file on February 9, 2018. Her first move? A site visit. Unofficial, late afternoon, no press. She walked the perimeter. The new contractors had already begun interior demolition, but the freezer was still intact, still cold, still locked. On March 2nd, Moreno contacted a former Chiltech subcontractor who claimed once again that the freezer had a second cavity built in. "Not big," the man said. "Maybe 4 feet deep. Luis said he needed overflow space, told us to keep quiet. We figured he was dodging health codes." When asked if he'd ever been inside the second compartment, the man shook his head. "It was sealed by the time we finished. Closed up tight." Fox submitted a quiet motion to preserve the structure during the remodel. This time, the court approved. A forensic warrant was granted. The contractors were notified. The panel would be removed under law enforcement supervision. But word got out. A blogger who followed the case posted a blurry screenshot of the permit and tagged it. "Freezer coming down, Marco's time." It spread. By March 10th, the hashtag #JusticeForMarco trended in Southern California, and the conspiracies returned in full force. Forums suggested body double theories, cartel storage, even cannibalism, all baseless. But noise made visibility, and visibility forced action. Inside the department, the cold case team reviewed every inch of archived footage and evidence. They discovered a handwritten memo, previously overlooked, filed by a night patrol officer in December 2011. The note described something strange. The walk-in freezer had shown a sudden drop in temperature that week, 18-degree arm lower than baseline, despite no known power outage or delivery. No investigation followed. Fox ordered the unit to be opened during a scheduled inspection. The date was set, April 4, 2018. But just days before, a new wrinkle emerged. A former employee, dishwasher Roberto Mendez, now 26 and living in Modesto, came forward again. He'd heard rumors that the renovation was happening and asked to speak confidentially. This time, his story changed. "I lied the first time," he said. "I didn't just see Luis go into the freezer. I heard something too. Thumping, like fists, from inside. Why didn't he say it earlier? Because he told me if I opened my mouth, I'd end up in there too." Fox documented the statement. It was unverified, but chilling. Combined with contractor testimony and original canine alerts, it was enough. The wall would come down, and it wouldn't be the contractors who pulled it open. But what lay inside? That answer was just days away. On April 3, 2018, nearly 7 years after Marco Ruiz disappeared, Detective Ellen Fox met with the department's technical services unit inside the gutted remains of El Jardín Verde. The remodel had stalled, but the building still stood. The freezer was intact, untouched, sealed. She requested a non-invasive scan of the interior wall. At 8:44 p.m., tech specialist Avery Chu powered up the GSSI Structure Scan Mini XT, a portable ground-penetrating radar typically used for detecting voids behind concrete and drywall. The team worked in silence, the only sounds the whir of fans and the faint static hum of equipment. After 3 sweeps, Chu paused. "You've got an air pocket," she said. "Vertical cavity, 4 by 6 feet. Doesn't match the architectural plans." Fox asked for density readings. Chu adjusted the panel's frequency. "There's something in the void. Organic material. Could be human. Microcliff." There was no record that space ever existed. It had never been permitted, never inspected. The next morning, April 4, 2018, law enforcement returned at dawn with a forensic warrant. Contractors were dismissed. Access was restricted. Inside, the air was already turning warm. By 7:39 a.m., the team began removing the false panel inside the walk-in freezer. The bolts came off too easily. Different threading, wrong size. Behind the plywood laminate and foam insulation was not a refrigeration wall, but a concealed cavity sealed with adhesive caulk, a hidden box. At 8:12 a.m., a thermal scope was inserted. The lens captured the image in a single frozen frame. A curled, desiccated figure in green pants slumped on its side inside a narrow hollow chamber. One arm extended toward the panel wall, as if reaching to push. A plastic badge tangled near his feet read, "Marco A. Ruiz, line cook." He had been there the entire time, behind the wall, inches from the search dogs, feet from the investigators, years from the truth. The body was preserved, partially mummified by 6.5 years of cold, sealed air. There was no visible trauma, no blood, no sign of struggle, but his expression, sunken, clenched, was not peaceful. Data point number 1. The chamber measured 4.3 feet wide by 6.1 feet high. Data point number 2. Temperature logs from 2012-2015 showed a sustained average of 4 degrees Celsius in the freezer compartment, even after the restaurant closed. The forensic team documented every inch. The drain had been rerouted. The cavity had no internal latch, no airflow, just metal, insulation, and silence. By 3:33 p.m., the remains were transferred to the San Bernardino County Coroner's Office. The case ID was updated, SBP 11-1749, Ruse 0418. A formal autopsy was scheduled. Outside, yellow tape lined the building. Neighbors watched from porches, and Liliana Ruiz stood behind the barricade, her hands clasped tight. No one had told her yet. but in her eyes, it was already written. Across the street, parked by a closed tattoo parlor, a dark sedan idled with its lights off. No one saw who was inside. It drove away before the hour ended. Call to action number 3. If you believe secrets can't stay buried forever, comment, "Find them all." April 5th, 2018. The day after Marco Ruiz's body was found behind the freezer wall, San Bernardino PD launched Operation Glassbox, a full forensic extraction of the hidden chamber. The goal: uncover any trace evidence that might explain how Marco died, and who put him there. Detective Ellen Fox entered the scene at 6:32 a.m. with a team of forensic specialists. The walk-in freezer, now shut down and defrosted, had become an evidence vault. At 7:14 a.m. the disassembly began. ROV-style forensic log, Operation Glassbox, 0642, lights stable, power isolated, 0714, panel tools engaged, Makita, XDT-16 impact driver, 0719, paint scrapings collected, outer coat black enamel, 0726, scratch marks observed, linear, fingernail-like, 0738, recovered blue fiber, polyester blend, 0753, partial fingerprint lifted, rear strut, 802, found clear plastic fragment, curved, irregular. 0824, plastic zip bag retrieved behind insulation seam. 0826, contents, cash, 3x20, broken keyring, torn note. 0833, scene cleared, chamber resealed. The torn note inside the plastic bag had one legible line. He said it's just until tomorrow. The bag's contents were carefully sealed and logged. The money was old but real. The keyring had no keys. The handwriting was faint, not immediately linked to Marco. By 11:15 a.m., the coroner reported no fractures, no gunshot wounds, and no signs of premortem blunt trauma. But the skin on Marco's hands was bruised and lacerated. His knuckles were swollen. Data point number 1. Fingertip abrasions indicated attempts to claw or push against the sealed wall. Data point number 2. Chamber measured 4.3 x 6.1 feet with no latch or airflow. A true dead space. By 2:01 p.m., the lab confirmed a partial print lifted from the inside panel matched Luis Belmonte, the former owner. It wasn't a smoking gun. He'd built the freezer. But it placed him inside that chamber after construction. And Luis? He had left no trace since 2016. Liliana Ruiz, upon hearing the update, said only this: he wasn't forgotten. He was buried alive. Call to action, number 4. If you believe silence is complicity, comment, "Tell the truth." April 8th, 2018. 3 days after the freezer chamber was opened, evidence techs continued combing the scene. In the recovered insulation debris, they found a clear plastic shard, cloudy and curved, too refined to be construction scrap. At 9:17 a.m., lab analysis identified it: a broken lens cover from a Corotech C112 Mini HD body camera, discontinued in 2013. The unit itself wasn't found, just the lens. But the model was rare, and it matched a batch sold to private security firms and small businesses. Microclip. Had Marco recorded something? And if so, where was the footage? Later that day, while clearing the kitchen floor drain, techs retrieved a rusted metal key jammed beneath the grate. It was stamped CTWK, the Coltech freezer brand, with serial number MU77421B, matching the 2011 walk-in build-out at El Jardín Verde. Data point number 1. Corotech C112 lens confirmed. Model lifespan 2010-2013. Data point number 2. CTWK freezer key, serial verified to El Jardín Verde's July 2011 order. At 3:20 p.m., Liliana Ruiz held the key in her palm. It was hers for only a second, then returned wordlessly to the evidence bag. That evening, Detective Fox ordered a side-scan sonar sweep of the building's rear lot, using a portable Kongsberg EM2040 sled, typically used for underwater terrain. The scan returned a shallow soil void, 4 feet by 2 feet, 6 inches beneath the gravel, marked for excavation. But at 1:06 a.m., surveillance caught a hooded figure breaching the fence. 5 minutes. No tools taken. No doors opened. Just one patch of soil, freshly disturbed. Microclip. Whatever had been buried, Someone remembered exactly where.